Hey everybody, my name is Ian Platenik. I'm a category manager with Insight, and I'd like to introduce you to the second topic of our three-part webinar series. First topic covered security and compliance, where we talked about some of the new features for Windows 11, as well as some of the system requirements on the hardware side. And we also talked about the different layered approach that Microsoft is taking for security and compliance within the new Windows 11 devices. So today we're going to change gears a little bit, and we'll be working with Mitch Doctor, again from Microsoft, who is the master trainer for Microsoft and commercial space, as well as Joe Flynn, who is our director of services with Insight. And he'll be talking about some of our cloud-based provisioning and autopilot services, while Mitch goes into detail on some of the changes around manageability and deployment for Windows 11 devices. So Mitch is joining now. He had a couple things come up, so he apologized, but he will be jumping on here shortly. So as soon as he jumps on, we'll go ahead and kick it off. So just sit tight, and we'll be on with it very soon. Hey, Mitch, how's it going?
One, two, one, 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 two.
Beautiful. Loud and clear.
Where's my audio out?
So Mitch, I just did a quick little intro.
Seeing it 1 sec, everybody. Sorry. I think we're ready to go.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for your patience today. Long weekend, we appreciate it. I love all the emoticons.
I know, all the emoticons. Everybody's like, oh, go!
I know,
I'm here.
excited.
I apologize, but I'm guessing you can all hear me loud and clear?
Yes, sir.
And we're good to go as I normally do, right?
Yes, sir, you are.
All right, sweet. And this is just autopilot, Intune, modern management, right, is what we talked about? I have it set. I just wanted to make sure.
Oh, yeah, episode 2.
Love it. Look at all the emoticons. This is fun.
I know, right?
Of course, I was heating up my I don't know why, like, this didn't come up on the calendar correctly. I have no idea what happened. I apologize, but I'm ready to go.
All right. Well, take it away. You have your slides, and you'll share those with your picture-in-picture.
Yeah.
And then after that, we'll kick it over to Joe and see how Insight kind of complements.
Sweet. I'm guessing we're already live, right?
Yes, sir.
Oh, hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm here. Love all the emojis and emoticons. I am Mitch Doctor. I am the U.S. Commercial Master Trainer for Microsoft. And today we're going to do some awesomeness. We are going to talk about autopilot and Intune and modern management with Windows 11. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and keep this train, well, get the train rolling, right? So there is a lot going on, and there is refresh opportunities, we know, and it all comes into great if you're getting new devices or you're looking at new devices or acquiring new devices. Now, where does kind of all of this fit into play? And Windows 11 is great for growth and growing your security portfolio and overall just better overall devices. But how do you make all those devices just make sense? And how do we make them get to where they need to be, aka into the hands of the end user who's going to use that device to be productive? And that's exactly what we're talking about today. One of the largest challenges in today's workplace, as we know, there's just been a slight shift into modern hybrid work, right? Where, well, excuse me, we don't all just, work in an office anymore. We're kind of all over the place. And because of that fact, we have our workers literally spread out anywhere and everywhere. So being able to take advantage of our remote and hybrid work era, workplaces need to be able to get those devices out to their employees and make sure they're productive, yet meeting the criteria of, security and data access and all that good stuff. So we went out in 2020 and we did a customer study with Forrester, and we found out that out of all the organizations surveyed, 80% of those organizations don't receive any device provisioning support whatsoever from a partner, meaning they are doing everything in-house, which is crazy to think about. And we'll talk about why that's really crazy here in just a moment. But 50% of those businesses who are not using any type of device provisioning support are actually interested in working with somebody to help them do just that and simplify both their device provisioning and deployment portfolios and deployment methods in order to make their hybrid work overall environment just that much easier to maintain and deploy. So I don't know how many of you have been out there, but I worked in IT at one point, and I know a lot of other people have. There is a traditional way of deploying Windows, and it's not wonderful. So what you had to do was you had to have IT build an image, but you had to build an image and gather security and policies and Office apps and which app works with which, and do you have all the right drivers and all the correct settings and this security policy with this, and then, but you have multiple types of employees, so what your executives are using and what your accountants are using and what your IT team is using and what your frontline worker is using are all going to be completely different. So you have to maintain multiple images, and then you have to deploy all of these images on the new computers, or when you get an old computer back, you have to overwrite it or rewrite it or restore it. And it is a huge waste in time. And money, obviously. So 6 in 10 decision makers would said it when they were maintaining Windows 10 images that they were maintaining multiple images and then obviously having to update those images. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but most images are stored on a little flash drive, right? And then they have multiple copies of that flash drive. What's the master? Which one's more important? Which is the right one? Which one is like the master of all master? And then how do you keep track of all of this, right? IT teams are reporting a huge challenge in both time and expertise to make all of this happen with device provisioning. Well, security teams should be probably doing more, right? And IT teams should probably be doing a lot more than just device provisioning. And on average, it takes approximately 4 hours to get one device ready. 4 hours to get one device ready, which is just crazy when we can think of how much time and money is being lost in 4 hours and one device. So what if there was a better way? And we all know what this is, right? What if you can just unbox a brand new Windows PC? You can, type in my name at mycompany.com, and that device provisions right in front of you and is ready to use. It's exactly what Autopilot is. Windows Autopilot is a device deployment made just super simple. By being able to simplify our device management and have all the security out of the box and all that protection, we have employees who are just that much happier with the devices you put in front of them. Everything is loaded into the machines and everything is ready to go. And we'll talk about what this looks like here in a second. But let's do overall. So what exactly is Autopilot? It is a cloud-based deployment technology for both Windows 10 and 11 Pro devices. They do have to be Pro devices to be able to use and utilize Autopilot. It enables deployment and configuration of devices through the internet and using Microsoft Partner Center. It requires just a couple things. 1, a Windows Pro device. 2, it requires Azure Active Directory, or Azure AD, as you might hear me call it. And it also requires some type of mobile device management solution. Some type of mobile device management solution we recommend is Intune. And you're going to go, why Intune? It's because it's already included in that license you're probably getting for Azure AD, for instance. And it is the Microsoft endpoint management system all kind of lumped together, and you're at that single license. So what does it look like in super simple terms? Great. So you might require something from the hardware vendor, or you're working with Insight in this instance, and Insight's going to go ahead and go, hey, we have these devices for you. It's ready to go. We're going to give you all the device IDs, and we can load them right up to Azure AD for you, and we'll direct ship out to your end user employee. What we're going to do for you is Azure AD then talks to Intune, aka the management portfolio, and we'll make autopilot profiles. We'll make sure those devices sync. So all your employee does is literally type in their email address, and everything comes down to them. Now, what is really neat by IT admins, or if you're going to use maybe Insight as a third-party provisioner for IT administrator, for, say, autopilot profiles, all of that lives in Intune, and then is circled back and forth with Azure AD. It just makes it a little bit easier in that respect. And you're going to ask me, okay, Mitch, that's great. What exactly is going on in autopilot and Intune? And the biggest thing here is that you can go ahead and manipulate different people and not just individuals by their tenant name, aka their email address or their Microsoft 365 account, but you're also going to be able to kind of associate them with, hey, they work on the front line, or hey, they work in the office, or hey, they do accounting, or hey, they're executive suite. You can also then file away profiles. Everybody in this line gets these apps, and everybody gets these apps, or this person gets this app, or in IT, they get specifically these security permissions. And you can kind of work that all out. So when an employee opens up that device for the first time and logs in, they get everything in really one fell swoop, which is really, really kind of cool. We'll talk just a little bit more about that as we go here. These are just examples of what licensing includes Azure Active Directory, as well as Intune as well. And then for more information on licensing, you'll definitely want to reach out to your Insight representatives. So modern Windows deployment is really about zero touch. And I think we kind of already tackled this, right? Whether it comes from the OEM or the disti or from Insight in this perspective, right? They can help you build profiles and settings and policies, or just ship the device, or deploy new devices, or anything else for that matter. The idea is we can help save up to over 4 hours per device and an average savings of almost $110 per device. Now, of a savings of almost $80, you'll notice the difference between 108 on average, so that's $17.50. Now, these are just kind of average market prices. The idea of, hey, if you already have all the Microsoft 365 licensing and you already have this all in play, and all you're doing is buying a new device and adding the autopilot service, that service would cost you typically less than $20 per device to have it fully blown out. Now, if you wanted all the autopilot profiles and all those things managed and done, again, those are different services, and that's something that Insight will talk about here in just a short bit. Excuse me 1 second while I grab some water. Now, white glove deployment is a slightly different here. And what's neat with white glove deployment, which is also an extra service, is we set up the same profiles, we deploy the same devices, but the device makes a quick stop at an IT desk. What is it doing at the IT desk? Well, it's going to do all that provisioning up front for you without any security input at all. When they're set up for white glove provisioning or white glove deployment, for instance, what is really cool here is you don't have to worry about what that bandwidth is at the end user. You don't have to worry about that slight downtime either at the end user. So when the end user opens up that device for the first time and types in their credentials, they can literally go right to work. They don't have to wait for a device download and provisioning in front of them, depending on their bandwidth. Because sometimes, maybe we have an employee who's only on a 10 megabit, God forbid, a 10 gigabit or 10 megabit download for some reason. And then we don't have to really worry about that as something getting in the way, because we can make a stop at a tech desk first and then get it out to the end user. So that's another service that is absolutely a possibility. And then let's talk a little bit about the life cycle here, because when we have autopilot and we combine this with modern management and say Microsoft's Intune, we can also manage the life cycle of a physical device. So you're getting new devices. We're going to deploy new devices. Now they're business ready and they're deployed. Great. So if something breaks, well, we can fix it. If we need new security policies, we can send updates. If we have a device that no longer works, well, we can replace that with a new device. And because autopilot and everything is tied to the individual credentials of each individual user's tenant, essentially when they get a new device and log back in with their credentials, all their stuff just comes back to them. All the security policies, all their files, and everything else for that instance, all is just ready to go. And what's really cool is because it is a company device, you can even make customized out-of-box experiences for each of these devices that are then also provisioned and deployed to the individual employees. So let's dive a little bit more into Microsoft's Intune, which is the actual management kind of dashboard for all of this. And the biggest thing about Intune that makes it such a huge win with IT and why IT loves it so much, it is all web-based. Because it is completely a web-based console, it gives a really rich experience from literally anywhere. And this is able to manage full-blown Microsoft Intune as well as on a company portal through Intune as well on a mobile device. Now, we already said we can manage devices from virtually anywhere. The dashboard allows us to do a couple different things. One, respond to alerts, so we can even set up customized alerts like, oh, if this user all of a sudden has 5 different devices all, connecting or whatnot, like I'll get an alert like, oh, my employee shouldn't have that many devices accessing data under their credentials. We can look into things like that. We can shut down that user. We can shut down individual devices. We can also manage software updates, which we already talked about. We can deploy policies and configure security policies, view reports, and of course, my favorite is role-based management, which we already kind of talked about. So let's make that a little bit broad, and let's try and explain that a little bit more. When we talk about a role, we could talk about I know we recommended like the frontline worker, and I think that's a good example. And then maybe somebody on the accounting team and somebody on the executive team. So I know this is completely rhetorical, but I'm going to throw it out here anyway, right? Does someone on the front line need the same type of security policies and same type of data access as somebody on the executive suite? And the obvious answer here is, of course not. That's silly, right, Mitch? Like, why would they need that? No, and they wouldn't, right? So the idea here is it is going to allow each individual user their own personalized security experience, essentially within the environment using Microsoft's Intune. Now, we'll go one step further because when using data, say that everybody uses, we're using least privilege access. So for instance, if you're loading up into, say, the company's main intranet hub, whatever, and they're all accessing a document maybe from HR that everybody has access to. Even though there's multiple levels of access, say a CEO or a frontline worker, whatever they're accessing, it will always use the least privileged access. So essentially, if we're getting that HR document, a frontline worker and a CEO are essentially at the exact same security level. And that therefore doesn't give any way or leeway into any of those upper tiers, therefore also securing each individual role higher or lower than it. So really, really important stuff here, not just for it's really easy to just manage who gets what, but it also really manages access and security as well. Another fold when we talk about overall cloud security. So it goes one further, and I love this because Intune doesn't work on just individual PC management devices, but it also reaches out in the cloud and it also reaches out to these guys, right? Our mobile devices. There are many, many, many companies out there that allow employees to, say, access company email on their personal device. I work for one of those companies, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well. But how do you manage those experiences, and how do you make sure the access and the data being accessed is still secure even on somebody's personal device you might not have, permissions over? Using Microsoft Intune, it allows us to do just that. It allows us to secure the individual email server or service, or even as you see here, we can manage the experiences on the actual mobile application itself. So that's meaning we can control what happens within Word or Access or Outlook or Excel or Publisher and OneDrive and things that are attached and that are using company data and using company security. All of that can be managed within Intune, meaning, hey, this employee cannot access this on this device, but they can access it on this device, and so on and so forth. It's pretty cool. And then this goes back to that lifecycle story we talked about. We can have an individual enrolled, all the self-services, they could be provisioned, and we talked about the deployment and using autopilot, installing mandatory applications, deploying restrictions when their devices maybe go down. We can restrict access. What if an actual device is stolen? These devices can be remotely wiped and essentially remotely bricked. These devices can also be remotely reset and restarted and made ready for the next employee who might use that device, or if that device needs to just isn't up to security compliant and force an update. All of that can be done using Intune. And of course, when we retire that device and we look at getting a new device, all that end user has to do is sign back in with their credentials, and that new device would be ready to go, whether that's a personal device or a work-provided device. So this is just a little bit of what we went over, a little more wordy, but just to kind of give everybody what this might look like visually. So we could deploy software packages. This was the idea of like being able to secure Word or Excel or Outlook itself. Software updates, whether that's software updates through third party or through Microsoft, all of that can be done and run through approval through Intune itself. We already talked a little bit about that endpoint protection, being able to protect any endpoint accessing the data of that company, because Intune manages that experience on whatever that device is, because we're managing the endpoints through user, not through the device itself necessarily. And then inventory and reporting, and of course, built-in remote assistance, which is really, really neat as well. So built-in remote assistance is now a brand new feature in Windows 11, as well as Intune, where you can actually get remote help foundationally in Windows 11 and Intune, being able to go right into a computer that might ask for help, whether you want to do a shared screen or a shared full environment, or even take control of that. So IT can now truly help with individual devices that need their help without a third-party tool, just using Windows 11 and management system. With that, I don't really have much else. It's pretty cut and dry stuff, but it is really important stuff. I know there's a lot of questions out there, so I want to go ahead and go to the Q&A, and then I'm going to pass it over to my friends at Insight to explain some of their services and how their services and Autopilot, Intune, and Modern Management all fit together. So, let's see. What about BIOS settings, tweaks, etc.? Alfredo, so if you want to do something with the individual BIOS, which wouldn't be image related, right? That device would have to unfortunately be touched, right? As far as I know at this point. However, if you are looking at something like an Intel vPro platform using Windows 11, Intel vPro platforms do have a remote way into the BIOS and kind of manipulating that stuff on another level of security. So that's that. When using White Glove, it's important to note that everything has to be in W32 format, not a mixture, which is a problem Microsoft is aware of. Thank you, Dan. Yes. So White Glove right now, it is a little bit of a back and forth, but I do know that it is being worked on. Sean, excellent question. Is there a documented path to migrate from VMware AirWatch to Intune? Not exactly to my knowledge, but I highly recommend working here with Insight, who have done migrations from other MDMs to Intune. What's really nice is other MDMs are already using a lot of that kind of back-end stuff that Intune is already using. And to my knowledge, lots of migrations to Intune are quite simple because a lot of that backbone is already in place because you might and are already probably managing Windows devices in your environment. Can we have the PowerPoint templates? I can make a PDF available to Insight if you feel like you really need it. I also will tag, I have a slightly longer version of this, which is available to watch through a YouTube link completely for free. So I'll make sure I make that available as well. Does Autopilot work with Windows 10 and 11 machines on the same Azure? Yes, they absolutely do. So you can use Intune and Autopilot and manage Windows 10 and 11 devices together within the same Azure AD domain. Absolutely, because they use that same backend core. So both can actually be managed simultaneously. Great question, Mike. Luke, wonderful question. I do not personally have the answer to. We might want to ask that of maybe one of the Insight specialists who are actually carrying out some of this, and that might be something they can follow up with you. And Mark Cotton, can Insight help a new customer get MSE3 and Intune up and working for the first time? The answer is, and feel free to correct me, Insight folks, but I believe the answer is yes.
Absolutely.
Which is also a really great transition. Over to you guys.
Yeah, it really is. Well, thank you, Mitch. That's super, super helpful. Let's go ahead and kick it over to Joe Flynn here. And Joe, if you want to go ahead and get started, maybe you can touch on that question right off the bat if you'd like.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. Thank you. And let me know if you see the slides, because right now I think I still see Mark. Okay, does everybody see the slides? Mark, I think you're sharing, if you can stop sharing.
Mitch, do you have the picture-in-picture on still?
I just turned off my video, if that helps.
Give me a second.
There you go.
Okay. So I'm just going to confirm, Mitch, you see the old way?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. So, yeah, everybody, so as far as Autopilot, shall we say even System Center, that's a big one out there, trying to shift into modern. I'll answer a couple of the questions before we start jumping into this. Insight definitely has services helping customers engage into what we call the cloud side of the world. And we like to call it cloud first because many customers since the pandemic, right, have shifted from the on-prem to a hybrid. And everyone we talk to now is really trying to go cloud first. They know that the endpoints don't need the dependencies of on-prem. So if their users are working in a hybrid state, if they're working remote, could be traveling, why have the need of an on-premises dependency stuck to that desktop? Possibly preventing them from logging in, connecting to resources, when many resources nowadays outside of legacy line of business apps are cloud-based applications. If we steer to that conversation of an AirWatch side, there's no real great transition path. The transition path, I'd say, from an AirWatch is probably similar to a System Center. You're going to have to move the applications. You're going to have to move your settings and your security policies and configurations from one to the other. I think the key difference there between like a System Center and an Intune is you can kind of do it in a easier shift where you kind of just switch a few items at a time before you actually transition over. Between AirWatch and an Intune, it's a full cutover, right? You're going to be deploying both agents on the machine, and you're going to have to move everything over because they are going to conflict with each other. Even if you try to look at if you have System Center on your machines and you put AirWatch on those machines, it's going to pretty much make System Center inoperable at that point, readable. So it's a larger migration for a Windows endpoint. It's a tad easier in some ways. If you look at a mobile endpoint that's supervised, it's a complete wipe and reload of that device because there's no way to get it out of a supervised device of one MDM to the other. See if there's any other questions. Good. I'm going to jump into it. And good question. The GCC High environment's not supported today with Autopilot. It is on the roadmap from the last we talked to Microsoft. We have many customers in that GCC High environment that wants to use it. But it is on the roadmap, no ETA as of right now. But let's get into some of the things that Mitch said. If we look at the old way, we were tied to on-prem. Everybody was sitting in the office. Everybody was at a desk connected to the LAN, very trusted environment. The problem now is as we shifted to the remote work, the old way just doesn't work, right? I mean, it's very complex. If we look at System Center, many customers' environments have many servers from System Center, whether it would be multiple primary, secondary servers, distribution points, management points, which is a lot of upkeep, a lot of patching, a lot of maintaining, a lot of IT support. But then if you get into the imaging, like Mitch said, we noticed some customers when we talk to have images 9 to 12 months old. They just don't have best practices and how to slipstream images. We do see something on the mature side of customers where they were able to get to a golden image, where ideally it's just a core Windows 10 and they were able to stack on top of it with task sequences, applications, and other things. But as we shifted into the remote world, right, and you're now trying to use a System Center or an image-based process remotely, that's extremely complicated. And scary enough, we have found many customers respond with today, when they go through the imaging process, they are still imaging the device with System Center, just one of the tools, right? They are logging into that device as the user, and then they're shipping that device out to the user, so there's a locally loaded profile in that device for the user to log into. Think about the security concerns there, right? Now, someone is logging into someone else's password. Potentially, if the user is getting a new device or refresh device, they're going to have to change their passwords that they're on existing today. And then when they get the new device, they're going to have to change that to the new password because obviously someone already in a desk side support already knows that password. So again, a lot of security issues. Even if I look at the old way from an Insight perspective, we process about 3,000 to 5,000 machines a day through our integration labs. And our integration labs is the part of our business that does imaging, provisioning, and other types of services on endpoints. We have customers that extend their networks into our environment in secure fashion. We have customers that have separate secured environments in our facilities because our networks are extended, VPNs. There's customers that do offline domain join or share passwords to join machines. And that was the norm, right, of yesterday. But as we get into this conversation of provisioning, I'll show you how that gets much more secure. Now, as we get into the modern way, we remove all those dependencies of on-prem. We go to a cloud-only environment. Now, the best part is I can provision the machine no matter where the user is, as long as they have internet connection. So they could be traveling. I could send them a device at a hotel. They could be at their house. They could be pretty much anywhere as long as they have that internet connection. But this is the best part is now with cloud-based solutions like in Intune, how I manage my Windows device, I can essentially manage every device the exact same way. Same methodology, same framework, same set of tools, single pane of glass. So if you think of 3 to 4 or 5 years ago when the big buzzword was UEM, Unified Endpoint Management, that used to be just a buzzword because it just wasn't practical. And now in today's world, that's practical. You can get a single pane of glass to manage all of your devices. And more importantly, if we look at the Windows side of the world, Windows 11 and Windows 10, it makes it so much easier to manage these devices from a cloud-based perspective. Now, if we get into the modern way, I am pulling down settings, policies, applications, security, encryption, everything I need to from a cloud approach. So it's very dynamic. The only thing left on that machine when the user gets it is simply basically the Windows OS. And at that point in time, we are provisioning. We are adding on top of what's already on that device all of the policies, settings, configurations that a company determines to set up from a cloud management tool. Now, that's good and bad, right? If I looked at my previous comment from System Center, where images probably weren't updated 9 to 12 months in time, provisioning, the moment you make a change, that impacts every device on how it's assigned. But more importantly, it even impacts provisioning. So for instance, it's 139 where I am today. If I provision a device right now, and it finishes all fine and dandy, and then I go and make a security change, and then 10 minutes later I provision another device, that security change could impact that provisioning process. So I state that because it's very important that any changes you make, you test. Because as we've done more and more white glove provisioning, or what Microsoft calls pre-provisioning in our labs, we find that customers make changes, unfortunately, without testing. And then when we go do a batch of 50 devices, we have 50 devices that are now failing because a recent change was made. So change control process when you get to a cloud environment is pretty critical because slight change can affect a lot. Now I'm going to get into the day of the life of a provisioning end user. What the experience is, what the user can possibly see, but then also where does Insight provide value in this type of process? And as I look into this, right, I call this the forward logistics, right? Everything required to get a user a device. And if I look on the left-hand side, ultimately, I think I went one slide too many, my apologies. So if I look on the left-hand side, I'm going to say that's Nancy sitting in the chair. Nancy could be a new user, could be an existing user, but the point is she needs a machine. What we try to drive to our customers is what we call this modern experience. And it's a great experience because it's tied to the end user experience. How do we give the best end user experience we can from the moment they request the device to the moment they get the device? So ideally, let's say we'll say this is a refresh, so Nancy needs a new device. We want to drive them to what we call an ITSM system, a ServiceNow, where we can kind of drive it towards a self-service approach where she can request the device that she wants. And when we look at System Center, if we look at imaging, we had to manage driver packages, task sequences. That's when many customers tended to standardize on a device or a model or a few models because it was easier to manage those drivers. With provisioning, we're leveraging the drivers that are already on the system. We're leveraging Windows update process. We're leveraging the capabilities of Windows 10 and Windows 11 with their built-in drivers. So now, since we don't have to manage drivers because we're not wiping the device and reloading it, the CYOD approach, choose your own device, which is a better approach for an end user because studies found that users are more productive on the device of their choice. Now, granted, we're not going to allow a user to pick any device they want. So most companies we talk to are narrowing their list of devices down, but they're not standardizing on a specific model. They are actually providing a few different choices to their end users. So Nancy's going to request that device. She's going to request a Windows, let's say possibly a Surface Pro device, Surface Pro 9, awesome device. And then once she requests that device, she's going to get a status of a shipment time. So if you think about this in a legacy way, many customers, they request a device. It gets sent to a manager to do a manual approval. It may get sent to someone else to determine what type of device the user wants. And then once they pick the device of type that they want, there may be an email that goes out saying, where am I shipping this device? The user may not be in the office. The user may be home. The user may be traveling. So if we put that focus on the end user to do it themselves through a self-service portal, it drives a lot of that time down from the approval process just to the logistics of where is it actually going. Now, once Nancy picked that device, now this is where Insight comes in from a value perspective with many of our customers. We have the capabilities of our warehouse and our depot where we can stock devices for customers, so we call customer-owned inventory. And the benefit now with the supply chain is you order a device today, you may not get it for 6 to 9 months. And we're hoping the supply chain gets better towards the end of this year, but again, that's a hope as of right now. But since we have that device on stock, so it's nice Surface Pro 9, we're going to pull it out of stock, send it to our integration labs. Now, we have choices here. You may choose, you know what, I'm going to have Nancy just automatically autopilot that device herself, or I'm going to do white glove pre-provisioning from an Insight Labs perspective, where we're going to pull all those configurations down in our labs, leveraging our internet, our resources, and then Nancy's going to have an even better end user experience. When you do pre-provisioning, there's two things you have to remember. Natively, pre-provisioning will apply everything assigned to the device through the pre-provisioning process. The nice part about an Intune is you can pre-assign a user to a device within Intune. So now, when I pre-provision that device, I not only pull down the settings tied to the device, I'm pulling down the settings, configurations tied to the end user. So it's a phenomenal experience. If you happen to not use Intune, so something to keep in mind, Autopilot is supported with other MDMs like Workspace ONE, but pre-provisioning and user assignments from an Autopilot perspective are not supported with those other providers. So now, for instance, we're going to say we're pre-provisioning this device. So we start it up, we hit the Windows key, and we pull everything down that's assigned to Nancy because the device was not only enrolled in Autopilot, but it was also assigned to Nancy. The best part about this is all I'm using is my internet connection. I don't have to know usernames. I don't have to know her password. I don't have to have connectivity into your environment. I'm provisioning this device from the cloud with zero access to the device. And when it's done, I either get a green screen if it completes or a red screen if it fails. If it's green, I close the device, I package it up. You may ask us to do kitting where we add peripherals and stuff in the same box before we ship it. We've done etching, asset tagging for customers for these devices specific to customer requirements. But the best part is I am packaging that device, never having to sign in, again, never knowing usernames or passwords, and I'm shipping it to Nancy right at her house. Nancy gets that device, she unboxes it, she goes through the same out-of-box experience as if she was buying the device from anywhere. Maybe it was buying a personal device. But the best part now, here's where the personalized experience comes in. Since we did autopilot and we assigned it to Nancy, when she gets to the login screen, it's going to have the company branding, and it's also going to know who she is. And it's going to ask her for her password, not her email address, because it's assigned to Nancy. Now, once Nancy logs in, anything that hasn't come down in the pre-provisioning process will come down specific to Nancy. Now, it's an awesome experience for the end user, again, because we're encrypting the device. We're possibly setting up OneDrive for known folder redirection. So what Nancy had on her old machine is already there on her new machine the moment she logs in. Applications are coming down. You can't beat this experience. Sometimes I say to customers, the experience on a Windows device going through autopilot at times is much better than trying to transfer from one mobile device, an Android to an Android, or Apple to Apple. I think Apple has it done a little better there, but if you bought a new Android phone, there's times where if you have AT&T and you have the AT&T switch or the smart switch from AT&T or others, that's not always seamless. They've done an awesome job with Autopilot and Intune to make this as seamless as possible for the end user and a top-notch experience. Now, we talk about, do I do pre-provisioning or do I do just Autopilot at the end user? Mitch said it. It's network connectivity. We have one customer in the Northeast, big customer, who was always doing direct Autopilot to the end user. And it was taking about an hour and a half for all the applications to come down when the end users are home. They've now shifted to white glove, where we're taking a lot of that time in our labs and our internet connectivity. So now when the user gets it, they're getting to a productive desktop in 5 or 10 minutes. So think about that experience. Brand new device, getting it fully configured from the cloud within 5 or 10 minutes from the moment the user's getting it. So great experience. And now the best part is if we're doing provisioning from let's say an Insight Labs perspective, we're not managing images. You're not managing images. You make a configuration change. You communicate the configuration change is out and tested. We go through our standard process of provisioning, and everything just continues with its motion day in and day out. Awesome experience. And the best part is from the time she requested it to the time she receives it, we've been able to get this down to approximately 3 days, as long as we're stocking the devices in our warehouse, again, customer-owned inventory. Now, here's where our value expands much more to the customer, is because not only from the provisioning side, we have the ability to help you with the life of that device. I mean, it's great. We've helped generate a better end-user experience for the forward logistics. Now the question is, what about the day-to-day of the device? What about the end of that device? And if we look at day 174, right, maybe Nancy needs an application specific to her device. If it's not already set up via self-service, she can call into our service desk. She can call in what we call a managed endpoint service, and then we can help push the application down and or install the application. Day 547, Nancy has a project that's due by the end of the day, and her machine is just running absolutely horrendous. She can call into that same service desk and managed endpoint service and we can help her troubleshoot the device. Is there an issue with the application? Is there an issue with the device? Is it possible she may need a replacement device, which we can take care of? But then more importantly, we get to day 954. This device is coming up towards the end of life. We have the ability to be proactive and already provision the device, ship a new device out to Nancy with the same box that she can ship the device back, where we can do compliance-based wipe and disposal. So again, not only helping on the forward logistics side with these tools and capabilities and endpoints, helping on the day-to-day of applications, security, configurations, but then also the reverse logistics, getting that device back and driving it. Now, as we continue down, Now, if we look at the full enhanced lifecycle capabilities, this is where I expand on that conversation, from readiness to workshops to helping customers drive the technologies, setting up the technologies, testing, piloting, to then doing the procurement of the devices, ordering the devices, customer-owned inventory, shipping the devices worldwide, because there's a lot of nuances on where and how you ship devices. More importantly, to the prepare. I said we do approximately 3,000 to 5,000 devices a day, my apologies, in our labs environment. And again, standard imaging, provisioning, asset tagging, these are all capabilities that we can do in our labs, all the way to the deploy, maintain, and end of life. So as you can see, if you're looking at what can Insight help with when it comes to any endpoint type, I always talk about forward logistics, procuring, setting up the device, shipping that device out, possibly setting up the device on site. Maybe it's not an endpoint, maybe it's an IoT device. But more importantly, how do you handle that device from a day in, day out? Right? Today, you may have many people supporting System Center. We can help you with the System Center approach, help you modernize off of System Center into a cloud-based approach. But then more importantly, supporting those end users and doing the reverse logistics. Now, just to summarize and circle everything back, Intune, Windows, Autopilot, phenomenal experience. Microsoft's done a great job. And I work with all the provisioning providers. If you think of Apple, Chrome, all the others, definitely Intune does an awesome job with how it works, the capabilities of it, what we can do as a partner to help you. And the benefit is, even if you don't use our services here, which there's a ton of value add here, we associate any device purchased through Insight to your tenant free of charge. Because the benefit of having us do it over yourselves is we can leverage serial number, manufacturer name, and model name. Where you as an end user or a customer, if you're going to use Intune or approach in those manners, you have to use a hardware hash to drive that. And a hardware hash is not easy to get. You have to turn on the device. You have to open up PowerShell. You have to run a PowerShell command. And so it's a much tedious process just for you to upload a device. Now, if you look at someone like Insight, the moment you order a device, it is already uploaded to your environment before you even get it, before the end user gets it. But again, if you now want the value add stuff, we have the ability in our labs or depot or warehouse to pre-provision, ship out, asset tag, all those advanced capabilities that we can drive. I want to leave you with one thing to look at right here. So this is a case study we did with a customer of 13,000 devices. This customer had 31 System Center servers that were all managed internally by the customer. If you look at the left side of this chart, and this is what I want to leave you with are these numbers, it cost them approximately $20.27 per device per month to manage. So if you look at the pink on the bottom, that is customer resource cost. If you look at the purple, that is everything required to do forward logistics, provisioning the device, or imaging the device, shall I say, for System Center, the reverse logistics, and managing the day-to-day of that device. And then the gray section is licensing cost for System Center, Windows licensing, et cetera. Now, as you shift, the middle column is Insight doing those exact same services. So Insight managing 31 System Center servers, Insight supporting the day-to-day of those Windows PCs, Insight doing the imaging in our labs, the refresh of devices out of our labs. So as you can see, we're able to get that down not only from $20, but all the way to approximately $14. Now, best part is, look at all the way to the right. This is where it gets awesome. Is because now, with our managed service, we're driving the value out of moving you away from legacy into modern, so into the provisioning world, into a cloud-based approach. Look at the pink. So our managed services to support a cloud-based approach like an Intune goes from $1.2 million to $262,000 a year for this size customer, where a customer internally was doing it themselves for about 1.3 if it went on a System Center, 1.4. Now look at the forward and reverse logistics, right? The purple area started at 7.4, 7.5 million for a customer to do it all themselves, to 4.8 million when we were doing imaging and everything else in our labs, down to 3.8 million by doing refreshing or managing and provisioning of those 13,000 devices for this customer. Now, you may say, yeah, that the gray area is $2.1 million in licensing. That's a ton of money. No doubt, it is. I mean, it's not a small customer. But keep in mind, that 2.1 million, most customers are already purchasing. They're already paying for. Many customers are leveraging the M365 license, which is an E3 license, which gives you all these capabilities. That E3 license also gives you the System Center licensing now on-prem. So keep in mind, as much as you say that's a big cost, most customers, I can take that 2.1 million of cloud licensing and add it to every column because most likely they're already using it. So that's the end of my presentation. I can look to see if there's any questions to answer, but I definitely wanted to leave you with that. Customer doing it all themselves, on-prem legacy, $20.27 per month. Customer shifted to modern, using provisioning, leveraging modern technologies like an Intune, with even Insight managing and Insight doing that forward and reverse logistics work, down to $13.39 per device per month. That savings alone, we found for a lot of our customers, helped fund the drive to modern. Because remember, it's not just an IT drive to modern. You're driving increased user experience, you're driving self-service, and you're driving increased security. Let's look at questions. And Ian, do you see anything specific? I'm trying to close some windows here to look at these questions.
Yeah, Miguel had a good one. He says, I work for a cruise company and provision devices from the cloud is not an option. How do we circle around this? Or is it better to keep using MECM?
Yeah, so I guess the question is if you're working, if you're trying to provision devices on a cruise ship, obviously, where the internet connection could be slow, I would recommend more probably an MDT type of approach, where you're leveraging it from a USB or a PPKG file, even as an option. But yeah, you're right. You're probably not going to use cruise ship-based internet if that's what you're referring to do autopilot. Now, Microsoft is working on a caching server for Intune. It's available today in System Center. They're working on a standalone one. But the good thing about that piece is the caching server will cache all applications that are in the cloud. So then your devices will pull off of that caching server and not go to the cloud. So it's something to keep in mind there. Another thing I do recommend is if you haven't already looked at delivery optimization, Windows 10, Windows 11, if you happen to be setting up or pushing apps out to a lot of machines that are possibly connected to the same intranet or network in some form or fashion, delivery optimization does decrease WAN utilization because it allows devices to share files across themselves on trusted networks or trusted peers. So that is great. We encourage customers to set up delivery optimization for when we do provisioning in the labs, because once we have one device set up, a lot of those other devices can pull locally instead of having to go out to the internet.
And another one here from Dan. He says, why can't the company upload computer hashes? They've been told that only Microsoft partners can upload hashes into Intune.
Yeah, so actually us, Insight as a partner, we always say no to hashes. So the hashes is what a customer has to use to upload. So Dan, in regards to your question, you would have to use a hardware hash to upload that device into Intune, where someone like Insight, when we have access to the partner portals from Microsoft, we have the ability to upload with the serial number, manufacturer, and model. So again, this is where the value comes in, because we get that serial number information if you order devices through us prior at the time of them getting shipped out. So we capture them, we create the necessary file structure or syntax, and we upload them. We've even gone so far from an Insight perspective where it's a fully automated process. So the moment the distribution centers or the OEMs send those electronically to our systems, we are capturing that, we're connecting to the Microsoft APIs, and we're doing the uploads automatically. So it's hands off. Give you an understanding, autopilot, the hardware hash is the easiest if you're a customer. From an Insight perspective, when we do uploads via serial number, manufacturer, model, Microsoft is extremely specific on how you upload it. And they're definitely the most strict out of all the OEMs we deal with from this type of a service. So for instance, if I had to upload a HoloLens device, HoloLens is case sensitive. So I had to make sure the H is capital and the second L is a capital letter. Otherwise it will fail for us. So it's very specific. If you look at things like a Lenovo, you typically wouldn't see a laptop name as their model names. Their model names to do autopilot uploads without the computer hash is very specific numbers and letters. It's not like if I look at HP and Dell could be a Latitude 5480. HP could be something in regards to their model names where Lenovo's don't. So Microsoft is strict on how they do it for a good reason. But again, partners can upload via serial numbers, which is much easier for us to do because we don't have to see the devices. We don't have to touch the devices. Our customers have to use the hardware hash.
And then we got one more question here. It's kind of a two-part, so I'll leave it with this one. Daniel is asking, would you please cover employee terminations or device removal from the domain? Then he talks about deactivating some of the applications and licensing. So we can start with that.
Yeah, and here's the benefit of going to a cloud-first approach is the moment I disable that user account, then I can block that user from logging onto that device, even though they're remote. If I'm looking at a domain approach, right, where the computer's offline, then that user will always be able to log in with those credentials. And even if I tie in the other features of the Microsoft Cloud E5, if I look at cloud app security, if I look at data classification, conditional access, those tools on a cloud approach can always force authentication. You can decrease the amount of time that a ticket or an authentication ticket may be used to where a user has to refresh their credentials more often, or even conditional access. So when you're in the cloud versus on-prem, the moment you disable, the moment you set a password, that's pretty much instantaneous in most cases in a remote approach. So it's much easier. But when a user does leave the company, you have the option within Intune to automatically refresh the device back to its original. You can refresh it and keep it within Intune Autopilot, so it keeps the same configurations, or you can wipe the device back to factory default. So you have plenty of options within Intune for a refresh device if you want to put it back in stock. And that's what we tend to do when we have the depot in our when we hold refresh or seed devices for customers, is we will do the wipe and reload at that time. So when we get the device, we'll wipe it, put it back to where it needs to be. So then we'll do the pre-provisioning process on when it's needed. Ideally, we like to drive the fact that you can assign the user to the device at the time you're pre-provisioning, because it's just a much better user experience for your users.
And then a follow-up question to that, as far as the naming conventions for the PC go, how is that handled?
Yeah, so when you do the autopilot profiles, you have the ability to set the naming convention in the autopilot profile. You can use variables and other things. You can also rename it via a script if you're going to push it out via Intune based on other characteristics of the machine. Autopilot profiles seem to be a common use from our customers. Many customers have profiles based on location, maybe organization, because they may get different settings and configurations. Some do it by OEM, and actually that's how they name the device. But you have multiple methods there. Most common one is doing it with the autopilot profile. The second one we've done is through scripting, which is pretty automatic too.
Great, thanks, Joe. It looks like there might be one more. Did you want to cover, can Intune deploy pre-boot BitLocker with autopilot?
So Intune can deploy yes, it can through Intune itself. So it's not so much autopilot. Keep in mind, when we say autopilot is just a service connecting your device to Azure AD. And that's some misconceptions there, right? Then Azure AD is pointing it to Intune or whatever your MDM of choice to do the configuration. So autopilot is just that initial connector. So when you boot up the machine, it looks into the autopilot service on, am I registered somewhere? And then once it registers into the Azure AD environment, then the Azure AD sends it to Intune to do all the configurations. Again, whatever MDM you use, Intune is the most common one we see customers using for Windows devices. But that can do the pre-boot configuration.
Okay. And I want to be respectful to everybody's time, but this is a good question regarding acquisitions. He says, if we have MECM and Intune in use, but tend to have at least one acquisition per year, is there a means to more easily onboard those acquired devices into Intune?
Yeah, so it gets the bigger question is, are they coming from an on-prem System Center MEM environment, or are they coming from another Azure AD cloud environment? So today, to go from a tenant to tenant via device, it's a wipe. We've tried many times. We tried scripting. We've been working with Microsoft. There's no easy way to transfer a device from one tenant to another that is joined to Azure AD. So it is a wipe, and you're rejoining it possibly through an autopilot process. As far as if it's on-prem, then you could set up co-management or tenant attached from the on-prem to your cloud Intune environment. The other option is just doing device registration, but keep in mind, your UPNs and everything else have to be set up in the cloud for all that to work cleanly. But again, device registration through AAD Connect or MEM tenant attached co-management from that on-prem to that centralized single tenant is where I would drive those type of conversations. But again, tenant to tenant, there's no easy way. That's no different than going from a supervised Apple device from Workspace ONE to Intune. It's a complete wipe and reload of that device.
Thanks, Joe. All right, everybody. Well, with that, we can go ahead and conclude this session. We will have a third webinar coming up on February 13th, where we'll dive a little bit deeper into the actual hardware itself with the focus on productivity and collaboration. So really understanding what's new about the actual hardware itself. But really appreciate everybody's time here. I know we started a little bit late and we wrapped up a little bit late. So if you stuck around, we really appreciate that. Quick thank you to Mitch as well as Joe. And with that, I will leave you with thank you and a good day.